Thank you, Safran Kadura, for inviting me to the second online conference for teachers of Syria and around the world. I'm Mike Contreras and I'm recording this presentation just in case technology dies or doesn't work. It's always good to have a flipped presentation of a presentation on flipped learning. So you guessed it, today my talk is about a teaching approach that I'd say I don't see enough in today's classrooms around the world, and it's called flipped learning. And its basic tenet is that with this approach, teachers strive to flip the learning of their student. Instead of the learning coming from the teacher directly, it's built up and constructed by the students in an active way. I always like starting and ending off with a quote. So let me just start off by saying, most ideas about teaching and learning are not new. Not everyone knows the old ways. Euclides, 300 BC or BCE. Well, really, not much has been come up with new ideas about teaching and learning in the few last thousands of years. But truth be told, we have come up with lots of new ways to approach and support teaching and learning. And combine these with the old ways, it's much more powerful. And this is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So, as a professional educator, when anything to do with teaching, I plan by first thinking about what the big idea is behind it and what's in it for the people that I'm teaching or talking to. And that really means what is the big idea behind this talk and why is it relevant to your lives. So today, as I'm presenting to you, I would like you to think about two things. Firstly, even though experts in learning sciences have known for years that there is no such thing as the average student, and the two edges of a very knowledgeable student and a very low-level student, and that each student is unique, and our schools, our course books, and even our teachings is still mostly targeting the middle. Yet there must be ways to reach every student. So today I say to you that flipped learning approach is this way, and especially for an environment with little or no tech, I'm proposing an approach that I too have learned from other professionals called the in-class flip. And here are some guiding questions to help you reach that big idea. How can we flip the learning of our students? Before we touch on the how, I think it's really necessary to talk about the why flip learning, and then what is flip learning before reaching the how of flip learning. And of course, finally, we're going to touch on what is in-class flip and continuing, how do we do it in our classes? So maybe as some of you have picked up, I really like using the understanding with design framework or the backwards design thinking to design my lessons and presentations. So the next step in my planning process would have been to ask myself, what does student success look like? I really can't assess your understanding of this passive presentation, but wouldn't it be great if you do pick up something interesting from this talk to have you post something on social media about it, maybe using the hashtag #FlipLearning. To me, that would mean that some teacher out there might have been influenced just enough to try something different in their classroom. So really quickly, as I said, before I talk to you about what is flipped learning, I'm going to start off with why we should flip the learning of our students. Well, I had recently received an email from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. That sounds really cool, doesn't it? Don't get me wrong, I applied to follow an online teaching course about differentiated instruction, and it was just a promotional email about their course. But what struck me was a message from its core faculty chair, and she's a well-known expert on differentiated instruction, Rondi Bonda, and basically she said that post-COVID we're going to expect a wider range of student variances or student differences, That means students will come into our classes either with very little knowledge because they didn't really advance their knowledge over the past year, or a very high level of English because they self-regulated, they self-learned, and they constructed learning using technology mediums, and they help maybe with family and friends, and obviously their teachers. And this is going to cause greater problems and challenges, and students are most likely going to need greater support from us. And as she said, Rhonda Bondi, quote, "There will be no more teaching to the middle because the middle will no longer exist." And that got me thinking. It got me thinking of Ted Rose, a TED talk that I had watched many years back and left a great mark on me, another Harvard graduate professor. And basically, Rose talked about US Air Force cockpits and fighter pilots. And it was actually quite interesting because what he said that back in the 40s, because of multiple flying accidents, the US Air Force ran a study and then demanded everything to be adjustable in the cockpit, adjustable chairs and adjustable instruments and so on. And basically that study revealed that there is actually near to zero pilots were actually in the average range of these 10 bodily measurements they used, and they actually took a sample of over 4,000 pilots. So, and what did the Air Force do? Well, as I said, they banned the average. And they no longer bought airplanes with an average based on an average cockpit size. Everything had to be adjustable. Well, he connected that with today's technology, and he said, well, if we are designing our learning environments on the average of the average student, and he mentioned 10 learning strengths and weaknesses, chances are that we're really designing it for no one. And wouldn't it be cool if we could get these adjustable seats for learning for every learner? What happens if we ban the average learning in our classrooms? So teaching to the middle will no longer be effective because of today's student profiles. So basically we need to find a way to reach these jagged edges or these extremes of the learning spectrum. And for me today, I propose the flip learning approach. So, moving on. What is the flip learning approach? Well, flip learning has been widely used these days, but as I said in the past, and I say often, I'm really not sure if everybody has understood the true meaning of flip learning. And for most people, they see it as making a video for their students to see at home. And this really isn't the essence of flip learning. Not even if you send enough information and instruction at home for students to master before they come to class. To me, there's a whole lot more, and it's really magical, and this is what I'm going to touch on today. So let's look at exactly what happens in a typical classroom. In a typical or traditional classroom, the teacher's mostly in the front of the group space. Students have their eyes front towards a board, maybe observing the teacher presenting the content. Well, in this model, teachers typically present material to students and have their students practice thereafter. After that, students go home in the individual space and maybe do some more practice and revision. This might even include some higher order thinking skills, and yet done at home without facilitation, without teacher facilitation. Well, maybe the lucky ones have help from a family member, but most certainly others don't. Maybe this is even a parameter we should include and should be documented maybe in the student's learning profile. Well, in the flip learning classroom, you concentrate on flipping the learning of your students, and this really means putting whatever content you can into the individual space for students to learn on their own. And, as a result of this, you end up having a lot more time in the group space to concentrate on constructing learning, which usually ends up on a higher scale connected to Bloom's taxonomy. It's saying that the best definition for me is from the Flip Learning Network, and it states that flip learning is a pedagogical approach in which direct instruction moves from the group learning space to the individual learning space. and the resulting group space is transformed into this dynamic and interactive learning environment where the educator guides students as they apply concepts on the subject matter. So, how can we flip the learning of our students? Well, why flip content? Well, for one thing, it's faster. Food for thought. How many of you timed a content presentation stage to under 3 minutes? And most probably, it turned out to be over 20 minutes because you didn't really think about the mood and the student readiness to actually take in that information. So you had a lot of interruptions. You had a lot of students not interested, maybe classroom management issues. So if you had made a video, not only do you decrease the flip content, the content time, the teacher talk time, but imagine a student at home, they watch the video when they're ready and they can actually stop the video, maybe go back, and just by a video you have a number of choices where they can decrease the sound or increase the speed or decrease the speed and actually read maybe the translated edition or read the English version of your presentation. And you can obviously give a number of choices. It doesn't just have to be a video. You can just give them the course book to read, or maybe some extra information on paper. So why not even getting them to find their own information on some sort of content? Talking about a grammar content, you could actually say, well, get onto your mum's phone and find your own YouTube videos and bring them to class to show us and present it to us. I don't really know your teaching context that well, but they're really literally thousands of tools you can use to differentiate your content. Like I said, even just recording a short video, it really does consider differentiation, because they can stop it and rewind it and look at it again. But you have to think about giving student choice, maybe just having them read a grammar table or read the Lexis and do something active with it. But food for thought, what happens if they don't all have access to devices and internet? And I know a lot of you out there are probably saying, well, what about young learners? I've got your backs covered, so we'll talk about it in the next few slides. Just before we do that though, what do we do in the group space? Now that we've saved all this time, what is the teacher's job in the group space? Well, your job is to actively engage your students constructing their learning. And there are many things you can do to make your classroom more engaging, especially now that you have the choice and now you have the time. Let me just note here that dynamic and active learning environments doesn't really mean just all activities. There is room for practice activities like individual tasks from course books or from worksheets. Just make sure when you're planning your lessons to make sure you know exactly what is it students should understand, the big picture. What is it they should know, maybe learn by heart, and what is it they're able to do with that stuff, and then just balance out your activities and the practice stages as you're creating your lesson plan. So after the individual space where the content is flipped, you've got the group space, and then you've got time in the group space to check own understanding. Students check their own understanding and give them extension activities where they extend their learning. For me, it's very important, as you'll see a little bit further on, the use of exit slip routines, giving them a chance to self-assess not only their learning but the lesson, a lot of metacognition there, and even having a peer assessment involved, getting their near peer role models to talk about what they've learned and things like that, which we'll talk about. And activities you can use for extension to extend their learning is work on project work. Something I use a lot is Wilt, what I learned today routine, where taking this excellent sleep routine, I get them to blog. We've got a school blog where I get them to blog what they learned, what they actually picked up from the lesson, and you could get them to write all the words and all the new words they learned from the lesson in a vocabulary notebook. So moving on now, I want to talk to you today about what is in-class flip and how can we do it in our classes. Basically, in-class flip, this is really cool. Let me read the definition from a great colleague of mine, Martha Ramirez and Carolina Rodrigo. I've had the pleasure to be working with them online for TESOL, CAL, special interest groups with the EVO sessions for the past couple of years, and I've learned a hell of a lot with them, and they've really transformed the way I see my classroom, and that's why basically I'm here today, maybe to rub a bit of that magic onto you guys. So in-class flip, it's a set of adaptable in-class configurations where the individual and group states coexist in order for flip learning to take place within the teaching setting. And basically that means the flip learning where we did it at home, or we do it now in class. And obviously for teaching contexts where there is no access to technology or very limited access to technology, that really helps, or even teaching contexts where there's no homework policy, say. Basically here, there are two main types of models, and these are called the station rotation model and the in situ model, or non-station work. Even though the station rotation is not new, what is new is the different ways in which the content can be flipped within the stations. So in-class flip is both the flip content, which is flipped learning, traditionally for the individual space, and there are other types of stations which is used for the active group space. Basically, the types of stations we can see is the flip station, which has to do with what content you're flipping. Like I was saying, we're avoiding direct instruction, and we're looking towards the flipped content in a flipped station. So let me go over these. Basically saying this is where we put all the content the students need to access on their own. And as you see here, I've put all the tech solutions and rearranged them for no tech solutions, and that could be just the use of the coursebook with more facilitated instructions. It could be the use of reading material, inducive grammar learning and teaching and stuff like that. It could be the use of flashcards or the card quiz games and stuff like that. Poster instructions, or if you do have access to some tech, like the teacher's phone, it could be a video, maybe on a mobile phone, on a tablet, on a laptop, where you have students rotating to the flip classroom, the flip station. So having a look at the practice station again, the practice station could be just bits of paper where they're constructing jigsaw activities. It could be some practice exercises. It could be the use of props for role playing and experiential learning. So there's a lot there to think about. Also in station rotation model, there's something that we call the independent station, and this is a station which is not dependent on the previous ones. These are great for if you're reviewing a topic, or it could be like what Martha and Carolina call a wildcard station. Maybe for the students, the early finishers. And sometimes I've placed board games in there, or some independent reading, user grading readings, or I give them access to my my laptop, and they create a blog post for some other activity. And in general, it's a way to help students revise content or wait to get onto the next station. So, in the station rotation model, we also have a station called the teacher support station. And even though this could be your desk, or could be a station where you may not be sitting there because you're moving around the class and actively being engaged yourself and facilitating learning, it could be just like a box where students can write questions which can be addressed by a whole group discussion at the end of the class. So this is a really powerful method, especially for the shy ones, or some that feel a bit behind or intimidated to ask a question in normal circumstances. And in their latest release of the in-class flip model, they proposed the peer instruction station, and this is based on Eric Mazur's notion of peer instruction, and the idea of getting students to talk to each other and discuss issues. So basically this could be having a short explanation on maybe paper, and having a questions, and then you have to get the students in this peer instruction station to commit to an answer, and if they're all they don't agree, they actually discuss until they reach the aha moment and they understand what exactly is the answer. This is called just-in-time teaching. And Zoltan Durney, a motivational scientist, talked about near-peer role models and the influence they have on struggling students. So in station rotation model, we also have the feedback station. These are stations where students provide feedback on their learning, on their lesson, metacognitive, how the lesson went, what they thought about it, and they could actually provide feedback as peer feedback to their peers. And these three types of feedbacks in this station really foster metacognition and help the teacher make their lessons better. Here, specific feedback could be by using, the teacher could use rubrics or checklists to get the students to go over the content and see what exactly how they went with the content and how they level up. So, I want to talk to you about the main types of the station rotation model, since now we know what kind of stations we could actually use. So the main types really have to do with the configurations of the group space. And four of these, as you can see here, are called the sequenced, the looped, the half and half, and the mixed. Basically, in the sequenced configuration, all students have to go through the stations, and we have a flip station for the content in various forms. Then we could have 1 or 2 or 3 practice students where all the students have to go through the stations in sequence. So if you have a lot of students, maybe you can have 2 flip stations or 4 flip stations, depending on the number of students you have. Then we have the looped configuration, and this basically means that at one stage all the students are going to pass by each station, and they could start at any station. And separately we have the flip station, which basically is the flipped access to the flipped content. Remember, we aren't actually teaching directly. So the half and half, when groups are small, like up to 6 students max, and teacher intervention is actually necessary, we can use this configuration where half the students are accessing, say, the flipped content, and that gives you time for the other half to be in direct contact with the student, maybe for tutoring, maybe to go over some doubts on the content, and that really helps in small groups. So we also have the mixed model, and this is where students get to pick which station they want to follow. It gives choice for students, maybe not for students that know the content, maybe not to access the flip content at all. And this way you're giving choice on content, on the process of the way they're learning. And if you differentiate also on the product, you're fulfilling a full differentiated instruction cycle. So in situ or non-station rotation, this can actually be thought of as a traditional lesson, and the only difference is that everything is ready for them to be used by the students. And by that I say you flip the content and you're giving access to the content in the flip station, but they'll be sitting by themselves, or like a solo where they're sitting by themselves, or you could pair them up and they could access the flip content and then access the practice and the activity stages, or you could break them up into small groups and they can all work on this together. This basically really involves having some sort of a digital format, and things like the use of BYOD, bring your own devices, and classrooms where technology is readily available, like tablets and or mobile phones, and you could use digital packaging like HyperDocs or Google Slides or Nearpod and such tools like that. And basically students have all the different steps and in the learning cycle, and it is actually really well scaffolded, and your job is to guide and facilitate the students that are in need, and that way you're really facilitating for all edges of the learning spectrum, because we're there to support and guide them. So basically this is a huge topic, and basically what we've seen, the main problems of the flip learning or the in-class flip method is that it's twofold, and it's broken down into teacher beliefs and time for planning, say. Basically for teacher beliefs, the thing is that you have to have this mindset where you have to let go of total control, and sometimes that could be really difficult because of the fear of chaos, as it says here. But if you let go and you give guided practice and planned activities to your students, they're gonna really pick up on social learning and they will surprise you. So I'm not saying one of the main skills of using flipped learning in your classrooms is the notion of problem solving. Yeah, there will be problems, and you will be asked to change something in the plan right on the spot, and you have to be ready for that, and always have like a plan B, maybe because of technology failing. But the thing is, you have to change your perception of what students can do. There's no room for, well, my students won't do that, and they're so loud and they're so noisy and they're not motivated enough. Well, we have to tap into what motivates them, what ticks them. We have to find their interests, and we have to make it relevant for them. One of the biggest issues in planning, because is planning, but isn't planning part of our teaching job? Don't we plan? So basically it's just thinking about the planning differently and being able to organize your space. And sometimes we hear of teachers where they've got fixed tables. I've seen it before, where they've got fixed tables in an amphitheater, where they can't really change the seating and have the classroom as they would like. Well, that's not really an issue. You could use the walls. You could put posters up on the walls. It doesn't have to be these types of dreamlike Google Classrooms. Well, preparation time. The good thing with flip learning is that you create content, flip material that could be used again and again, and that could even be like your flashcards, which you do anyway, and you could laminate these like little maybe the names of the flip stations and the practice stations and so on. And as you're using your material and you reflect upon it, and you're getting reflection from, you're getting feedback from how the lesson went from your students, you just have to refine the content and get it ready for the next class. So it's there, it's reusable. Make sure you package it, and it's really easy to access. And one of the things that creates problems is having super clean instructions. I really suggest you Google Martha Ramirez and flipped instructions. They were a really big game changer for me, and nowadays I don't do anything without having flipped my instructions. And these things include things like the time on a task they're going to do, what the roles are, the task or the steps of the task, and things like having what are the deliverables, and even facilitating learning, maybe using having a useful language box, because we're talking about language building. So moving along, I've been using this quote so much recently. Dave Burgess, Teach Like a Pirate book, awesome. And he says, well, at some point in your career, you have to decide if you care more about teaching to tests or teaching to kids. And like him, my decision was made a long time ago. I teach kids. So keep that in mind. I hope you liked this talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Hope you have any questions. And I would really like to hear from you. Make sure you use that hashtag. And be well. Thank you.